The wagon lay broken in the valley, like something the land itself had rejected. Wheels snapped, canvas torn loose and flapping in the wind. Anyone riding past would have known, in a single glance, that whatever happened here had ended badly, and that it had ended not long ago. Ethan Walker reined his horse to a stop, a tight feeling settling in his chest before he fully understood why. He had traveled this stretch of land for years, and silence was nothing new to him. But this silence pressed down harder, as if the air itself was holding its breath. He dismounted slowly, hand resting near his side out of habit, eyes moving over the wreckage. Tracks were everywhere, boot marks, horse prints, but already the sun and wind were working to erase them. He took a step closer, then another, and saw something that made him stop cold. A hand, pale, trembling, half buried beneath a broken beam. For a moment, Ethan thought he was too late. Then the fingers moved. "Hey," he said quietly, his voice low and steady, as if the ground might shatter if he spoke louder. "I'm not here to hurt you." The girl was wedged beneath the wagon, pressed so flat against the earth, it was as if she'd tried to become part of it. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, tracking every small movement he made. Dirt streaked her face, and fear sat on her like a second skin. One leg was trapped under a beam, twisted at an angle that made Ethan swallow hard. She shook her head when he moved closer, lips parting without sound. Her body tensed, ready to pull away even though there was nowhere to go. "It's all right," he said again. "I won't touch you unless you say so." That got her attention. She blinked, eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to decide whether the words were a trick. She glanced past him, toward the far end of the valley, then back to him. Whatever she was listening for, she expected it to come back. Ethan followed her gaze. Nothing moved. No riders. No voices. Still, he understood her fear well enough. Trouble had a way of lingering, even after it seemed gone. He crouched a few feet away, careful not to crowd her. "My name's Ethan," he said. "I've got a ranch not far from here. You're hurt. You can't stay like this." She shook her head again, more fiercely this time. Her fingers dug into the dirt, knuckles white. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw and thin. "Don't," she whispered. "They'll come back." The words hung between them. Ethan didn't ask who they were. He didn't need to. He had seen enough wrecked wagons to know what fear like that meant. "I'll stay," he said. "I'm not leaving you here." Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Greed, impatience, threat. Whatever she saw there made her hesitate. Slowly she loosened her grip on the ground, though her body still trembled. It took time to free her leg without causing more harm. Ethan worked carefully, talking the whole time, telling her small, ordinary things, about the weather, about the creek nearby, about his horse cropping grass behind him. He kept his tone calm, steady, like a line thrown across rough water. When the beam finally shifted, she cried out. A sharp sound she tried to swallow back. Ethan froze, waiting for her to pull away. She didn't. Instead, she squeezed her eyes shut, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her cheeks. "It's over," he said softly. "You're free." Free was a word that didn't seem to fit the valley, or the wreckage, or the look in her eyes. Still, she let him help her sit up. The moment she was clear of the wagon, she tried to crawl away, dragging her injured leg behind her. Ethan reached out, then stopped himself. "I won't force you," he said, "but you won't last long out here alone. Not like this." She stared at the ground, jaw tight. At last, she looked up at him again. There was no trust there, only exhaustion and something close to despair. "My name's Grace," she said, barely louder than the wind. Ethan nodded. "All right, Grace. Let's get you somewhere safe." He tore strips from his spare cloth to wrap her leg and offered his shoulder. After a long pause, she took it, her weight light but unsteady against him. As he lifted her onto his horse, Ethan glanced back at the broken wagon, at the marks already fading into the dirt. Whatever had happened here wasn't finished. He could feel it, deep and certain. And as he turned toward his ranch with Grace clinging silently to him, Ethan Walker knew one thing for sure. Walking away had never really been a choice. Grace slept in short, uneasy stretches that first night, waking at every sound the ranch made. The wind against the boards, the creak of the house settling, even the distant call of an owl outside the window made her flinch. Ethan noticed it all without saying much. He kept the lamp low and his movements slow, as if sudden noise might undo what little calm she had found. The ranch house was plain and worn, built more for use than comfort. Still, it offered something the valley had not: walls, a roof, and time to breathe. Ethan set her up on the narrow bed near the stove, cleaned the cut on her leg as best he could, and wrapped it tight. Grace watched his hands the whole time, her eyes sharp and guarded, ready to pull away if his touch lingered too long. "You don't owe me anything," Ethan said when he finished. "You can leave when you're able." She didn't answer. She just nodded once, as if storing the words away without deciding whether to believe them. By morning, she had learned the layout of the house without moving much. She listened to Ethan outside, chopping wood, feeding the horse, going about his chores as if this were any other day. That steadiness unsettled her more than noise would have. She was used to panic, to raised voices, to things falling apart. Quiet made her mind wander back to what she was trying not to remember. Ethan brought her food and left it on the small table within reach. "I'll be out back," he said. "Call if you need anything." She waited until he stepped outside before eating. Even then, she kept her eyes on the door, chewing slowly, shoulders tight. Safety, she had learned, could disappear without warning. Late that morning, a horse rode up the dirt path. The sound reached Ethan before the rider did. He straightened, a strange tension settling in his chest. Visitors were rare this far out, and trouble had a habit of wearing polite faces. The man who dismounted wore a badge pinned cleanly to his vest. His hat was well cared for, his boots barely dusted. He smiled easily as he approached the fence. "Mornin'," the man said. "Sheriff Cole Harris." Ethan nodded. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" Harris glanced past him toward the house. "Word reached town about a wagon found torn up in the valley. Folks are concerned. There's a man asking after his daughter. Says she went missing along that route." Ethan felt the words settle heavily. He kept his face calm, his voice even. "Haven't seen anyone pass through." The sheriff studied him for a moment, not accusing, just measuring. "The father seems worried. Well-spoken fellow. Has friends. Thought I'd check in, see if anyone stopped here for help." Inside the house, Grace heard the voices and froze. Her breath caught in her chest as she recognized the calm tone of authority, the kind that could open doors she needed closed. She shifted on the bed, eyes darting, every instinct telling her to hide even deeper. Ethan leaned against the fence, blocking the sheriff's line of sight. "Just me here," he said. "Always has been." Harris tipped his head slightly, as if weighing the answer. "If you hear anything," he said, "you'd be doing the right thing to report it. Family ought to be reunited." The word family felt sharp. Ethan nodded once. "Of course." The sheriff mounted his horse and rode off without another word, leaving a trail of dust that took too long to settle. Ethan watched until the rider disappeared beyond the rise, then stood there a moment longer, the weight of his choice pressing in. When he stepped back inside, Grace was sitting upright, her face pale. "He's looking for me," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Ethan replied, "and I told him nothing." She searched his face, confusion mixing with fear. "Why?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked around the small room, at the table, the stove, the window that faced the open land. Because whoever's chasing you has the law walking ahead of him, he said. And because you didn't run into my life asking to be handed back. Her shoulders sagged just a little. Not relief, something more cautious than that. She lay back against the pillow, eyes still wary, but less sharp than before. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying dust across the yard. The ranch stood quiet, but the sense of refuge was thinning. Ethan knew the choice he'd made couldn't be undone. Trouble had learned where he lived, and it wouldn't be long before it came knocking again. The afternoon light stretched long across the ranch yard, turning the dust a dull gold. Grace sat on the edge of the porch, her injured leg propped on a crate, watching Ethan repair a section of fence that hadn't needed fixing until now. Neither of them spoke much. Silence had become a shared habit, careful and loaded. She broke it at last. "They won't stop," she said. Ethan kept working, hammer rising and falling in a steady rhythm. "I figured as much." Grace drew a slow breath, then another, as if gathering courage from the open land around them. "The man asking for me," she said. "His name isn't important. What matters is that he taught everyone to call him respectable." Ethan paused, then set the hammer down. He turned to face her, leaning against the post. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "Not if you're not ready." She shook her head. "If you're going to stand in this with me, you should know who's coming." The words carried more weight than she intended. Ethan nodded once, giving her the space to continue. She stared out toward the valley road, eyes distant. "He said he was protecting us, said the world was dangerous, and we were safer under his rules. My mother believed him. My brothers did too, until it was too late." Her voice tightened. "When they tried to leave, he called it betrayal." Ethan felt a slow heat rise in his chest. Not anger yet, but something heavier. "And the wagon?" "They were supposed to be escorting us," Grace said. "Friends of his. That's what he told the town. But when night came, they changed." She stopped, fingers gripping the edge of the porch. "I hid because my mother pushed me under the boards and told me not to move. I listened. That's the only reason I'm here." The yard seemed smaller suddenly. Ethan looked at the house, at the fence, at the open land beyond. He understood now why she never relaxed, why every sound made her flinch. What she carried wasn't just fear. It was survival sharpened by loss. Before he could speak, the sound of horses reached them. Grace stiffened instantly. Her eyes snapped to the road. "That's them?" Ethan followed her gaze. 3 riders approached at an easy pace, dust curling lazily behind them. The man in front sat straight, confident, as if he were arriving for a friendly visit. He raised a hand in greeting long before he reached the fence. "Afternoon," the man called, his voice smooth and warm. "Name's Harold Boone. I'm looking for my daughter." Grace's breath came shallow and quick. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between her and the yard. "You're on private land," Ethan said evenly. "State your business and be done with it." Boone smiled, the expression practiced and calm. His eyes, however, flicked past Ethan toward the porch. "I believe my business is already here," he said. "My girl's had a fright. I'm here to take her home." Grace stood, ignoring the pain in her leg. "I don't have a home with you," she said. Boone's smile faltered just enough to show the strain beneath it. "You're confused," he replied gently. "You've been through a lot. This man doesn't know you like I do." Ethan felt the weight of the choice pressing down on him. He could step aside, let the law sort it out, let Boone's influence do what it was meant to do. Or he could hold the line and accept what followed. "She stays," Ethan said. For a moment, Boone studied him, measuring the cost of resistance. Then he nodded, as if disappointed rather than angry. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "But I admire conviction." Grace's hands were shaking, but her voice held. "You taught me to obey," she said. "You never taught me to live." Boone's eyes hardened. He tipped his hat. "We'll speak again," he said, turning his horse. "Soon." The riders left as calmly as they had come, dust settling slowly behind them. Grace sagged back onto the porch, tears finally spilling free. Ethan sat beside her, not touching, just close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. "That was the moment," she said softly. "The moment I stopped running." Ethan looked out toward the road, knowing Boone's calm retreat was more promise than surrender. "Then we stand," he said, and in that quiet decision, the ranch stopped being a refuge and became a line that could not be crossed. Dawn arrived without warmth. A thin gray light crept over the land, and with it came the sound Ethan had been waiting for. Hooves, not hurried, not loud, but steady and certain, as if the riders knew there would be no one to stop them. Ethan was already awake. He had spent the night moving quietly through the house, checking doors, counting steps, listening to Grace's breathing from the cellar below the kitchen floor. He hadn't slept. Every choice he had made led to this morning, and there was no pretending otherwise. The first rider appeared at the edge of the yard, then another, then more behind them. Harold Boone rode at the front, hat clean, posture relaxed, like a man arriving to settle a disagreement over coffee. He raised a hand again, polite as ever. "You should have reconsidered," Boone called. "No need for this to get difficult." Ethan stepped onto the porch, shotgun resting against his leg, not raised. "Turn around," he said. "Take your men and go." Boone sighed, almost regretful. "You don't understand how this works. You're standing in the way of something larger than you." A nod from Boone was all it took. The barn door burst open as one of Boone's men moved toward it. Another circled wide. Ethan fired a warning shot into the dirt, the sound cracking across the yard. The men hesitated, then pressed forward anyway. Smoke came next. Not thick at first, just a warning curl rising from the side of the house where a lantern had shattered. Flames caught fast in the dry wood, climbing with a hunger Ethan had feared all night. Inside the cellar, Grace heard the noise and knew. She pressed her hands over her ears, then forced herself to move. Ethan had shown her the latch, the loose board behind the shelves. He had told her to wait until she heard silence, but silence never came. Ethan moved through the yard, keeping the men back as best he could. Heat pressed against his skin as the fire spread, the house groaning as beams began to weaken. Boone stayed near the fence, watching, his calm never breaking. "This doesn't have to end badly," Boone called. "Hand her over, walk away." Ethan looked at the burning house, then at Boone. "It already did," he said. A struggle followed, confused, loud, and fast. Orders were shouted, horses panicked, smoke blurred everything. Ethan felt a sharp blow to his shoulder and went down hard, the world tilting as heat washed over him. Boone stepped forward, boots crunching on ash and broken wood. He looked down at Ethan, disappointment etched across his face. "You chose wrong," he said. Before he could take another step, the cellar door burst open behind him. Grace emerged through the smoke, coughing, her hair loose, her face streaked with soot. She didn't run. She stood there, trembling but upright, no longer hiding. Boone turned slowly. For the first time, his control slipped. "Grace," he said, soft and coaxing. "Come here." She shook her head. "I already did once," she said. "I won't do it again." In the chaos that followed, Boone lost the careful balance he had always kept. He lunged toward her, and the moment broke. A final shot rang out, sharp and final, cutting through the roar of the fire. When the smoke thinned, Boone lay still. His men scattered, some fleeing, others frozen, unwilling to test what remained of Ethan's resolve. The house burned down to its frame. The barn followed soon after. By the time the sun climbed fully into the sky, the ranch was little more than smoking ground and blackened beams. Ethan lay near the corral, barely conscious. The firelight gone from his eyes, but not the fight. Grace knelt beside him, gripping his hand, grounding him in the quiet that slowly returned. He opened his eyes once. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, tears slipping free. "Because of you." He tried to smile. It didn't quite work. By the time help arrived days later, there was nothing left to save. The ranch was gone. Boone was gone. What remained were two people standing in the aftermath, breathing, changed, and bound by a choice that could never be taken back. Spring returned to the valley slowly, as if the land itself needed time to decide whether life should take hold again. Grass pushed through the darkened soil where ash had settled, and the creek ran clear, unchanged by what had happened nearby. The first sign of the new ranch was a single post set straight into the ground, then another beside it. Ethan worked at a careful pace, his movements still stiff from old injuries that had not fully faded. Grace carried boards, measured lines, and learned the weight of tools in her hands. She no longer startled at every sound. The valley was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. They worked mostly without words, not because there was nothing to say, but because some things no longer needed to be explained. The new house was smaller than the one that had burned. There was no wide porch, no tall beams, just strong walls, a solid roof, and windows that faced the open land instead of turning away from it. Grace chose where the door would go. Ethan did not argue. At night, they sat near the fire pit outside, watching the stars come out one by one. Grace talked more then, not about the worst memories, but about the pieces that had survived them. Her mother's laugh, her brother's stubborn pride, the way the wagon used to rock gently when the road was smooth. She spoke without breaking now, her voice steady, her gaze fixed on the flames. Ethan listened. He had always been good at that. In the past, silence had been his shield, something that kept the world at a distance. Now, it felt different. Now, it made room. There were days when he wondered if what he had done could ever be called right. The choice he had made at the fence line had burned more than his home. It had closed off roads he could never travel again. Sometimes he woke before dawn, the old tension creeping back into his chest, and stepped outside to breathe the cold air until it passed. Grace noticed. She didn't ask questions. She simply joined him, standing shoulder to shoulder, watching the light return to the valley. In those moments, there was no debt between them, only presence. The townsfolk came by once, months later. They spoke carefully, offering supplies, offering distance. No one asked too much. Stories had a way of settling into something easier to accept over time. The valley returned to being just another place on the map. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the hills in soft gold, Grace stood at the edge of the field. Her hair had grown longer. Her posture had changed. She looked like someone who belonged to herself again. "I used to think surviving was enough," she said. "Now I think it's just the beginning." Ethan nodded. He understood that better than he ever had before. The wind moved through the grass, gentle and steady. The land bore no scars that could be seen from a distance. Only those who remembered would know what had stood there once. As darkness settled, the lights in the new house glowed warm against the open night. Ethan set another log on the fire. Grace leaned back in her chair, her face calm, her eyes clear. Neither of them spoke about the future in firm terms. They didn't need to. It was there in the way the house stood solid against the wind, in the way the valley no longer felt like a place to hide. And when the fire burned low and the stars filled the sky, the silence that wrapped around them was no longer heavy. It was earned.